At the risk of sounding like the clown who follows the high wire act at a circus, let me all welcome you back to this final session for today. We hope to see you all at the reception tonight, and of course for the kids talk later on. My name is Larry Mazzeno. I actually at one time worked here, although I had trouble finding my way around the building this morning, having been gone for 9 years. They've changed so much since I was here. I have the pleasure of emceeing, shall we say, moderating this panel, which is really going to be more like a conversation, we hope, among three scholars who I think are more than adequately equipped to talk about the future of Updike studies. From my immediate right, across the panel, Quentin Miller, Professor of English Language and Literature at the University of Suffolk in Boston, is the author of Updike in the Cold War, Drawing the Iron Curtain, a study that examines how Updike's views grew out of the defining context of American culture at his time. Professor James Schiff, of the University of Cincinnati, is the author and editor of books on Updike that include Updike's version, Rewriting the Scarlet Letter, John Updike Revisited in the Twain U.S. Authors Series, and Updike in Cincinnati, the Literary Performance. And he also edits the John Updike Review. Bob Batchelor is James Pettis Professor of Communication and Executive Director of the James Pettis Communication Center at Thiel College. Bob is a prolific writer and editor, and among his publications is the 2013 John Updike, A Critical Biography. We will go in that order in which I have introduced them. So, Quentin, you're on.
Thanks a lot. We're all just going to talk for 5 or 10 minutes and then open things up, so this is going to be more of a round table. How many of you remember the Centurion website? Raise your hand if you... Yeah, so most of us know that. The early days of the internet, we had Jim Yerke's, for those of you who don't know, wonderfully full, if sometimes a little difficult to navigate because this was the early years of the internet, website, the Centurion. And many of us remember this site, which was truly, I think, a labor of love. We can say it provided the perspective of a true fan with links to interviews, articles, and especially news at a time when Updike was still churning out work at a steady enough pace to keep Jim busy. The Centurion, like Updike, is no longer with us. It stopped in 2009. And so today or last week really, I decided to see what would happen if you were to Google Updike now, looking for criticism. And I was thinking of the kind of first time, person who was encountering Updike, not the serious scholar, but just the student who might be interested in what they might find if they were to just go on the open internet in search of this now. And I went with a principle that all of us use, I think 99% of us use. You never go to page 2 after Googling, right? It's just whatever's on the first page is good enough. So these were the search terms I used. The first one was just John Updike, and the second one, John Updike criticism, and the third, John Updike scholarship. And Wikipedia is, of course, first, and we'll look at that in a minute, but the second site I came to was this, oops, sorry, I'm just doing that. And it's not working. There it is. Backspace and pardon me. The second website I came to, if you just, again, Google John Updike, is this NEH site. And it says John Updike biography, so you might go to this and think that this is a good source, but it ends, this is from the 2008, and so he's still alive at this point. And it ends with, he is still looking and writing at the very end of it. So again, if you were a neophyte and came to the website, you get that kind of information, which is not accurate. So that's number 2, if you Google Updike. And then the John Updike Society comes up next, thank God. Where's Jim Clapp? This is a wonderful site, of course. We can look at it now that we all know it. So this is a great resource, but maybe a little bit heavy for the first-time user of Updike. They're going to look at it, and there's just a lot of information there. They're not going to be able to just kind of get a quick, down and dirty overview. So the next one that comes up, that was the third. This is the fourth. Where's the little finger that usually... The third is from something called achievement.org, and so we click on that, and the Academy of Achievement comes up, and it's another site that looks like it might be a kind of wonderful overview for us, but it doesn't mention, it goes through his career to some degree, it doesn't mention a single short story. So again, the casual user of the internet who's looking for Updike finds that and thinks that, well, he maybe never wrote any short stories, which is a real kind of disservice. And again, this is just a basic search. This is the last one on the page. There are many others on the page. There's 4 or 5 others because you get about 10 entries when you do one of these searches. Most of the others are Amazon. They'll bring you to a book on Amazon, so they're kind of relatively useless. But then there's this one from the Poetry Foundation, and I found this one kind of amusing for the following reason. I've lost my finger again. I'll just read to you from what it says toward the end of this. Funny lines. This is a Poetry Foundation site, and it says, in addition to poetry, his work has included novels. So this is all on page 1. Again, just Googling Updike. So that's the basic search. So you go to the next search term that I used was John Updike criticism, to be looking for that. Again, Wikipedia is first, and I'll talk more about Wikipedia in a little bit. Second is this. I think Alvernia, I'm going to donate a map to them so that I can come back and where to, yeah. Here it is. This is a review of the Library of America editions of Updike that came out. It's something called The Millions, and I wasn't familiar with this site, but it looks kind of hip. There's all of this stuff. And this is a very kind of damning review, I think. And this is, again, just a review of the kind of Library of America editions. But we've already talked a little bit about David Foster Wallace and Jonathan Franzen and the kind of snarky remarks they made. Those are kind of front and center here. You can see them displayed up in the top there. And the author of this site, whoever it is, wonders out loud, he refers to Updike's sagging stock and wonders aloud whether he wrote importantly, even though he was incapable of writing badly. So it's just one of these reviews that's, kind of a zinger. And I'm going to point out again that this is number 2, the second thing that comes up after Wikipedia when you Google John Updike criticism. Just a couple more on this. The third site and the fifth site link to one another. And it's this literary-history.com. And this begins to look like something that might be more useful, again, for the first-time student. It's introduction biography. It's got a number of different sites and links to them. And we might think that this is a pretty good site or a useful overview of criticism, but it certainly isn't comprehensive. It's missing an awful lot. And I didn't spend a lot of time on it, but I did just happen to click on the title of my own book, and the link brought me to the wrong place. So I don't think it's terribly reliable. And I think it's possible that I'm terribly narcissistic. Yeah, everybody does that, right? Who hasn't Googled themselves? The Pennsylvania Center for the Book site, then on the same page, maybe number 7 down, I wrote it down, comes up. But it's very kind of text heavy. It looks like a good overview, but I'm thinking of the college student who wouldn't even trust a website that didn't have images on it, and this one doesn't. And again, it's somewhat useful as an overview, but it doesn't really list a lot of other books that have been published. You can kind of just get a flavor for it by looking at that. And then one more from the same site on John Updike criticism. This one's called eNotes, and it's a study guide kind of site for students. So we have to be aware that those are out there. But this is actually somewhat decent. At least at first it looks decent. There's some good images on it. It's not scrolling down for some reason right now. Somewhat comprehensive, and it's got a few, the list of the major works. So students might get a decent idea of that. But then there's the help questions toward the end, which devolve very quickly into some very particular needs of a handful of students, such as how would you analyze line 8 of John Updike's Perfection Wasted. So we're again not going to get a great overview of the the author from something like that. So the last one I Googled was John Updike Scholarship, and for the first time with this search term, Wikipedia is not the first entry you get. It gets knocked out of first place. The two Alvernia conferences, including this one, show up first. So, you know, we're there if you Google this. And then an article about Jim Plath and the childhood home, which we've been talking about, and we'll see tomorrow, shows up next. This is, well, look at it, it's a good picture of Jim here, so I think it's a good picture. Ooh, it's the last one. And again, this is, I'm just looking at the first page of each of these. So this is the fourth term after Wikipedia and after the two Alvernia conferences. I'm not sure what happened to this Suffolk conference, but you know, I'll take that personally. It's nowhere on the first page, maybe it's on the fifth or something like this. But this is clearly from Jim's home institution, and I want to show you the picture. Where are you, Jim? Did I miss it? Maybe it's on page 2. How would I have seen it next? I didn't do it. Anyway, that's one of the sites that shows up immediately. There's an article from the Harvard Gazette, published in 1998. I won't even bring us there in the interest of time. And then there's a remembrance from William Pritchard, published in the American Scholar, which is good. And the nature of a lot of the works on this page are just kind of remembrances or, you know, obituaries in the immediate aftermath of Updike's death. But nowhere really do we get anything like what we had on the Centurion, and that's my final kind of takeaway point. If a student were looking for, if a new reader of Updike were looking for the amazing wealth of scholarship that has been published on Updike, it's not really available on the open internet, at least the way it was back before 2009 when the Centurion was being published. So I flagged this as a problem, but without going too far. First, I wanted to point out that there is something that you get at least a teaser of that represents a good scholarship, or a good kind of annotated bibliography, and that is our friend Jim Schiff's Oxford Bibliography entry. You don't, this isn't on the open internet, but they at least kind of give you a teaser for it. So you get here, I think, the notion that there's this good article out there which will, I'm an idiot with this thing, I'm so sorry about that. Which will give you a sense of everything that's been published. So you get Jim's very good introduction and then the general overviews. What you don't get is the full article, which gives you an annotated bibliography of some of the other works that are broken down in various ways. But at least you know it's out there if you're doing this kind of research. But then finally, I'm going to bring us to Wikipedia, because I will say, you know, everyone rolls their eyes with Wikipedia. But this is actually, as Wikipedia pages go, a very good one. I think it's, you know, it's full, it's balanced, it contains a lot without being too terribly overwhelming. And then at the very bottom, we get a list of the criticism that's been published. So it is actually there. I'm getting there, but you can kind of see the depth of this article. Full bibliography with links to other works. So obviously, if you click on any of the blue ones, you get yet another Wikipedia entry. And there's another article on that. And then finally, at the very end, sorry if I'm making anyone nauseous by doing this, all those footnotes. We have further reading and literary criticism. And there's quite a bit of it, and again, it's not comprehensive, it's not everything that we should read on Updike, but it gives at least a decent, weighty sense. And the other reason I bring this up is because Wikipedia is the only site of all of those I've mentioned that anyone in this room, right now or 5 minutes from now, can change, right? That we've all got the Wikipedia, somebody in the room might have written this for all I know. You want to fess up? Or at least contributed to it. But we all can. That's the point of Wikipedia. It's not written by any independent agent. It's written by everybody. And so if we find the Wikipedia website deficient and we realize that it's the first site and maybe the last site that anybody who's Googling John Updike might find, we all have, I think, kind of an obligation to improve it as much as possible. So I'll just leave you with that and just leave you with our next speaker and maybe one last presentation. Thank you.
There are people in the world that see a hornet's nest and run away. I'm the kind of person that sees a hornet's nest and wants to kick it and see what might happen. So if I am offensive at all in this talk, I kind of mean to be. But we'll get over it, right? We're all friends. There's a small group of us. I would say if this determines the future of Updike studies, we're failing. Okay, so let's just get that right out on the table. If we did by a show of hands how many people in this room are retired or within 5 years of retiring, I would think that the majority of hands would go up. And I'm not ageist. I love my mentors and colleagues, and I see them around, and I'm actually nervous with you guys out there and these guys sitting next to me, and this man sitting next to me. They all know how much I revere their work. But are we developing the future of Updike studies in this room? You know, and maybe even the bigger picture, are we responsible for Updike's larger reputation and his standing? And that's why I put together this panel, because I think we really need to address these challenges. What I did specifically, and this is anecdotal evidence, but I talked to novelists that I know, very well-known novelists, and I talked to some editors that I know, people who acquire books for publishers. I'll go to the publisher point first because it was pretty positive. Okay, so editorial acquisition editors and publishing companies are interested in Updike's work. And so that's one way we influence the future of John Updike studies, by publishing books. We have a ton of books, and just the people in this room, and some are recent, some are older but great, and the thing is, do we have more coming in the pipeline? And that's the challenge. Editorial boards in today's publishing world are run by marketers, okay? If you don't know that, well, let me introduce you to the future and current of publishing. Editorial boards are run by marketers. Even university press publishers want to make money. And if Updike is not seen as somebody who makes money, they will not give book contracts. But I'm cautiously optimistic that Updike will remain a subject for the near future. The challenge, and my current publisher that I work with most frequently and acquire books for, is Rowman and Littlefield. The books, depending on where the editorial board sees the sales, that's where you see the prices. So if Quentin and I do an edited collection on Updike that's going to be published, they're going to publish it automatically at $75. And for some of us who publish books that are $90, $75 seems like a great deal. But nobody's buying a book for $75. In fact, nobody's buying a book for $45. And that's considered a low rate for somebody who publishes the kind of scholarly books that we all do. Okay, so that's a challenge. We have to prove Updike's, ability to sell, and then urge our publishers to try to ratchet down those prices. Rowman and Littlefield, for example, publishes their hardcovers. If they think it's going to sell, it'll be between $35 and $45. And that's the low end, and they publish the ebook for 1 cent less. Now, I've yelled and had conversations with my editor about this, like, this is blasphemy, this is insane, but they don't care. They would rather know that they're going to publish 300 books at $75 than take a chance that a book is going to be $25 and could sell any number, because they know they can get 300 for $75, and they'll take that money. Because we all know how small the royalties are. So you think a book for $50 that sells 1,000 copies, and you get this little sliver and they get a big old chunk, okay? But the editors that I talked to were positive. The novelists were all respectful, but none of them were gaga about Updike. They didn't cite him as a major influence in their own writing. One author, a very well-known female novelist, I thought was really insightful. She cited Updike in the fact that he was able to write about his life so honestly and somewhat blatantly, I guess, depending on your point of view. She felt that he actually opened the novel up for female writers to be more Updike-like in their writing, which I thought was great. The challenge I see is that, we all laugh about David Foster Wallace and Jonathan Franzen and all these hip novelists. Well, Wallace has been sainted, and that thing about Updike is hurting Updike every single day, especially with younger scholars. Okay? I'm old, but I haven't had a PhD for that long. And so most of my friends from graduate school are the stereotypical adjuncting English people around the country. The men are all thin, they wear all black, they have the right glasses and very cool haircuts. The women are kind of semi-goth, dress a little 60-ish, but they don't care about Updike at all. They don't care about Updike. And what Foster Wallace and some of those other hip authors, so I run a contemporary American literature book series. I get proposals all the time on Junot Diaz and all these far-flung. And I'm not saying that Diaz doesn't deserve to be studied, because he does, but I didn't get anything from on Updike. Nothing. And it's a challenge. It's a big challenge for the future of Updike studies. Sometimes in my fantasies, I think that if Matthew Weiner from Mad Men would just buy the rights to Rabbit Run and make it into a movie, we'd be able to change Updike studies overnight. We need something big. I don't know how that happens. I will say, there's an underlying current of kind of piling on the literary estate, Updike's literary estate, for being so, guarded, maybe is the nicest way to put it. That's a big challenge. I have one of my mentors is a higher up in the Mailer Society, and I don't know how he does it, but every Mailer review, if anybody here's read the Norman Mailer review, it's a brick. And I don't find Mailer all that interesting. I mean, I like a couple of his works. I published in the journal. I even published a piece on kind of comparing Mailer and Updike and celebrity, the notion of celebrity. But he gets people from all over the country, and that thing is this thick every year. They do it once a year. It's this thick. Their conferences is probably not much bigger than ours, but they have kind of publicity. Sean Penn goes to the Norman Mailer Awards in New York City and that kind of thing, because the kids who run the literary estate for Mailer, they see the writing on the wall. They want this aura around Mailer to continue. So there's a book of essays that came out the same time that the authorized biography by Michael Lennon came out. And that got a ton of publicity, much more publicity than Begley's getting with his work. The challenges that we face are the challenges that the humanities faces, okay? Younger people are not getting jobs. I'm a Gen Xer. I have almost no Gen X friends who are professors, okay? My entire generation was outsourced. Most of the people that are my age are adjuncts, or they left. They just quit. And we're getting pushed out by the millennials that are now getting their PhDs. We need to have a more active attempt at getting the millennials on board. Okay? There are not very many millennials in this room. There may be. Okay? Quentin and I were joking after these guys gave their great talk. There's the future. But can we put it on 3 guys? These 3 guys are the future of Updike studies. Here you go, guys. Get to work. What are you doing sitting here? Go write. But other author-affiliated societies, other author-based societies are having the same problems. Now, I don't want to sell anybody down the river, but I've been sneaking around and trying to gain little spy information. The Fitzgerald Society, as far as I can see, and from what people tell me off the record, so I guess I'm putting it on the record, it's in trouble, okay? It's top-heavy, okay? And I don't mean that disrespectfully. It's top-heavy. We're top-heavy. They're top-heavy. We can be respectful of our elders and the fantastic work that we stand, on your shoulders and try to continue, but it's a challenge. It's a challenge the United States faces as the humanities becomes ground under the rhetoric of jobs and who the job creators are. Okay, so we all have a stake in this. The Hemingway Society, same thing. Now they have a young president now. They've kind of turned it over, but she's just kind of the figurehead. That they're all hoping that she's going to save the organization. Plus it's Hemingway, so it's never going to go away. They just need to kind of refurbish. The Don DeLillo Society seems to be, to me, nothing more, and the president's one of my closest friends, it's nothing more than a newsletter, an email newsletter. Okay, and DeLillo's hot and cool. I don't know, maybe we need a Jonathan Franzen and a Michael Chabon Society or something, who knows? So I hope that you don't take anything I've said today as offensive, because I do not mean that at all. I say it out of the deepest care. I love John Updike. His work has meant more to me than anything intellectual in my life. But we are at a very important crossroads, and it's going to be tough to overcome it. Just like winning the battle of the humanities is going to be tough for this country to deal with in the near term. Thank you.
Bob alluded to the fact that Sean Penn was at the Mailer Society. I don't know if Jim Pfeiffer wants it out yet, but as I understand it, the keynote for the next Updike Society meeting is going to be Lady Gaga. Much to look forward to. I fear that I'm the only thing standing between you all and a much needed break for a couple hours, so I'll keep that in mind. Bob put this panel together as, the future of Updike studies, and, what do I think of the future of Updike studies? And I think the safest and surest thing to say is, I really don't know. I have no idea what will happen, and in a way, as an Updike critic, I should probably add that, I really can't fully be trusted with that question, because, if Updike's stature improves over time, I stand to gain, and if it diminishes, in a way, I have something to lose. So really, when you think, given my ignorance and my unreliability, you might want to go to the break right now. But if you will hang in there with me for a few minutes, I think there are some historical conditions and precedents that we can look to that may explain what could happen, or at least what determining factors will be. And what I've decided to do, just to kind of start off here, is talk about two prominent American novelists, consider their reputations briefly, and how those reputations changed near the end of their lives and after their deaths. And the two writers are William Dean Howells and Saul Bellow. William Dean Howells, how many have read Howells in the last 5 years? That's pretty, I think you saw 4 or 5 hands, and that's pretty good. I didn't know if we'd have that many, but Howells, for those who don't know his work well, was America's foremost champion of literary realism. He was a prolific writer and critic. He was our eminent dean of American letters, and his place in the literary canon in the 1890s and up to 1900 seemed absolutely certain. Hamlin Garland wrote in 1891, 50 years from now, Howells' sheaf of novels will form the most accurate, sympathetic, and artistic study of American society yet made by an American. His success is very great, and it will last. And then in 1899, readers of the magazine Literature named Howells the most deserving of entry into an American literary canon. And I think it's fair to say that in the year 1900, he was the most influential living literary figure in the United States. There was a planned library edition of Howells' writing, which was begun in 1911. There was going to be 32 volumes, and then rather quickly it stopped at about 6 volumes. And within a few years, things had changed dramatically. By 1920, the year of his death, Howells was perceived by many as a kind of a dinosaur. And he was read by few at that point. Modernism was in the air, things were changing. And Howells sensed this kind of decreasing relevance. In his final years he wrote, "I am comparatively a dead cult, with my statues cut down and the grass growing over them in pale moonlight." In 2005, one critic wrote, "Howes, though recognizable in name to most students of American literature and culture, is almost entirely unread." So the question becomes, what happened? What happened to Howes? Howes, who embodied a kind of genteel and Victorian tradition, had spoken profoundly to members of at least one generation, but was unable to connect with the next generation. As one critic wrote, "The young, mainly, no matter how irrationally, hated, misunderstood, misinterpreted, and attacked Howes. To them he stood for the establishment against which they must rebel. He became to them the horrid old man." Novelist Frank McTeague, who really wonderful novel. If you haven't read McTeague, I think it's a novel that I think is still very much alive. But Norris called Howes' novels respectable as a church and proper as a deacon, and he described their concerns as the drama of a broken teacup, the excitement of an afternoon call. And that description became somewhat famous, about all kind of late 19th century American realism. In 1919, H.L. Mencken attacked Howes and wrote, "The truth about Howes is that he really has nothing to say, for all the charm he gets into saying it." Sounds familiar. The reality is that there was a good deal of truth to what this critic said, but many had been misinterpreting Howes' writing. And because Howes was so prolific, many critics really weren't eager to read deeply into his work, and so would read one novel or would read certain passages of a critical review and then latch onto it, and often kind of exaggerate or mislead others, in an attempt to kind of be clever. But once the onslaught of criticism came, it was hard to turn the tide. The second writer I mentioned is Saul Bellow. And in terms of literary stature, Bellow was on top of the world in the 1950s, really up and through the early 1990s. He won the National Book Award on 3 occasions. He was the Nobel laureate. When I was a graduate student in the 1980s, Bellow was supreme, and that was confirmed by a 1994 Sunday London Times survey of distinguished writers and critics who named Bellow the greatest living novelist writing in English. Second was Updike. At the time of Bellow's death in 2005, Philip Roth said, "The backbone of 20th century American literature has been provided by 2 novelists, William Faulkner and Saul Bellow. Together, they are the Melville, Hawthorne, and Twain of the 20th century." And then Martin Amis, another distinguished novelist, described Bellow as the greatest American author ever. Yet less than a decade later, Bellow is seldom taught in classrooms. His name and work are not often mentioned, certainly less than Ross, and there are few new books and articles appearing on him. Again, what happened? In Bellow's case, I think it was a move toward conservative politics later in his life. I think also, when I studied Bellow in the 80s, he was seen as a more marginal figure as a Jewish American writer. I think a white Jewish male is not seen as marginal in the 21st century as he would have been, in the 40s and 50s and 60s and so on. His sexism and alleged misogyny. Others have talked about him not being a technical innovator. So the question becomes, what can we learn from the falling fortunes of Howes and Bellow? And I think several points. First of all, the decline of an author's reputation can be rapid. In both cases, it's been very rapid. The story's not over yet either, particularly with Bellow. I have a feeling that Bellow is going to come back and be talked about and be a significant writer 40 or 50 years from now. So I think that's something to keep in mind. I think something else to keep in mind is the laziness and sloppiness of critics, the way they often pigeonhole a writer whose work they don't know well. Howes made a comment about trying to capture the more smiling aspects of life in a review of Dostoevsky, and that line really came to haunt him, and it was really meant somewhat differently than critics took it. And then finally, I think the notion that culture and literary history are always evolving. And the direction of that movement can be crucial in determining an author's continued relevance. This might be more short-term in certain ways, but Howes was certainly viewed as too prudish and genteel with modernism emerging. And I think Bellow was perhaps seen as too traditional, too close-minded as multiculturalism exploded. The other question, I think, is how can we, what happened to Howes and Bellow, can we, how can we apply that to Updike? Is it at all instructive? And I think as you've probably heard some of the criticisms, there are similarities. And perhaps Updike will be viewed as another privileged old white guy who no longer warrants reading. It's a possibility. As much as we try, we can't necessarily control how things play out. But I think those of us in this room would prefer not to see that happen, and I think all of us, in this room feel that his work is of major significance and warrants considerable attention. And I think, for Updike's reputation, even though I said I can't see the future, I think for Updike's reputation to continue and to grow and to thrive and prosper, I think there's a few things that probably need to happen or that are important. And most obviously, studies of his work by critics and fiction writers must continue. And I think the good news is that that's happening. There are books published, unlike Howes and Bellow, there are books published every year on John Updike. There are journal articles that continue to appear. We now have the John Updike Review moving to 2 issues per year, and we hope to publish more criticism. So there's a lot of good news. That said, I think we need more. We need more criticism. We need stronger work. We need the strongest critics possible. I mean, if James Wood or Louis Manon were to write a book on Updike right now and identify his work as seminal, that would be huge. But if that doesn't happen, I think the rest of us, again, as I said, I think we have to write more, and we have to push deeper and write the best that we can. A second point, I think, is that Updike must continue to be relevant to younger fiction writers and readers, and I think Bob was alluding to this as well. And I guess questions that come to mind are, does his work still resonate? Is it worth rereading? And I do think there are a lot of younger fiction writers who have been greatly influenced by Updike. I mean, Ian McEwan. I mean, all you have to, I say younger, but I mean younger than Updike. Ian McEwan, I mean, if you read Saturday, that's an Updike novel. Laurie Moore, Nicholson Baker, Julian Barnes, and I think we could go on and on. There are, and those are really significant writers. In terms of what's happening with readers in the classroom, I taught Rabbit is Rich on Tuesday, so this is the most recent kind of information I have. And you know what? Typically, I like to teach Rabbit is Rich because I still value the last 2 Rabbit novels probably more than anything, except for some of the short fiction. But I like Rabbit is Rich too because it's polarizing with students. And I'll have maybe in my undergraduate classes, a quarter of them will say, this is the greatest thing I've ever read in my life. And maybe a third of them will say, I was so repulsed and disgusted and I can't believe we did this and read this and what kind of teacher are you? And so on and so on. But what was really nice to see on Tuesday is this is a class of PhD students, and it really worked. We had a great 3-hour discussion about this, and these were all readers in their 20s and 30s, and they were saying a lot of very, very smart things about the novel. What I should add, though, is that I have sensed, and maybe it's because I'm in a program where a lot of our best PhD students are creative writers, is that I think the younger students I've talked to are really interested in talking more about his short fiction and about craft and about language. And and certainly there's so much more that needs to be said about Updike. And one of the things that we have been trying to do in the review, I don't know if you saw the last issue, and then the next issue that'll be out in the winter, we have taken a story. We've taken a story that Don Greiner had kind of nominated or initiated. The story Leaves, and then we have editors, academics, fiction writers. Each issue will respond to that. And so Dawn, as well as two young fiction writers, Jamie Poisson and Sarah Strictly, wrote about Leaves, and then in the same vein as going with the next issue on the story Gesturing. Maybe alluding to Bob's point as well, I mean, critics writing about David Foster Wallace, George Saunders, and Gary Steingart are generally younger than those who write about John Updike, not completely, but generally. So I think as, those of us, who will be retiring in years to come, I think it is important, and it was wonderful to see the panel that was right before David's talk today, which I thought was a great panel and really interesting takes on Updike. But it is important that that generation is going to be, that Updike resonates with them. In addition, I think literary interpretation of Updike's work has to continue to evolve. We've got to find new ways of reading the rabbit novels and the centaur and the stories. I've been trying to encourage people to write about the lesser-known works like Villages or Seek My Face or the stories. But, I really think, the trouble with that, there's so much to write about. It could take us forever. But really, the rabbit novels, I think, have the best chance of enduring time. And I do think we have to keep on finding new ways of writing about them. And, we need, what would eco-critics and what would post-colonials say about Updike's work, whether it be the eco-critics toward the end of time, or of the farm, or the post-colonials, perhaps Brazil or the coup. Just a couple other points. I think we also have to be concerned with not only providing readings of Updike's work, but contextualizing him within literary history. This is an age where there's fewer single author studies. There's more comparativist studies. And, so I think we need to keep that. And I think Updike probably fares better during an era when there are more single author studies. But I think it's important that we look at him with other writers. I just did a piece in Cambridge Companion to American Novelists and tried to find some way of articulating how Updike is distinct from other writers. And for me, when I look at it and look at American literary history, how often American writers have been marginalized, either by race, sex, gender, sexual orientation, ethnicity, or even adopting a kind of eccentric or expat kind of persona. And this goes from Thoreau and Dickinson and Hawthorne and Melville and up through Wright and Morrison and so on. But how often the American writer is kind of on the margin or on the extreme, and often writes about the extremes and writes from the margin. And Updike, I think, is somewhat unique in the way that he kind of placed himself in the center, and particularly in the rabbit novels, and is really interested in this. Rabbit is at the center in a way of the American experience. So I think it's finding ways of talking about Updike in conversation with other writers. I think there's a lot of great things to look forward to in Updike studies. We have, at some point we will have the letters being published, and I don't know when that will be, but when they do, it's going to be Updike in another genre. And Olinger stories were just republished. There's new editions. There will be new biographies, new critical studies. So an awful lot to look forward to. An opening of the Updike House as a museum at some point, thanks to the hard work of Jim Plath and others. I guess to kind of wrap it up, it is up to us, though, I think. If we generally believe in the value of Updike's writing, then we need to teach Updike, we need to reread Updike, we need to write about him, and we need to kind of write even better about him. And you know, in conclusion, I'm not particularly worried about the future of Updike's reputation, which you know, to me seems relatively assured. Yet many admirers of William Dean Howells and Saul Bellows said the same thing. So I think it's instructive, that example, and I think it's important that we all keep writing and thinking about the work of John Updike. Thank you.
If Jim thought he was last, he's not. I'm last. I now am the only thing standing between you and your 2-hour break before the reception. But we do have time, if we keep to the schedule, for several questions, should anybody have something. Oh, look at the hands up. That hand in the back was the first one.
2 quick points for Bob. That idea of Matthew Weiner type, pitching the rabbit tetralogy as a presentation of social history, and cooking up something with HBO or Showtime, I don't know if you were kidding or not. Boy, I see interest in that. I see market value in that. And I commend you for that idea. Just tossed it out and I caught fire. The other thing, you have not entirely shredded my hope for the future of Updike scholarship. I see that 2 of the 3 of your panelists, that earlier panel, are here. And I know there were just 3 of them today, but I was heartened by their youth and energy. And I think if there are only 3, it's a hell of a place to start. So I tip my hat to the 2 who are here and say, keep up the good work.
Thank you. Great. And up there. Yep.
Now, Bob, perhaps you were describing my son in despairing of the future of Updike criticism. My son's 36. He's a university professor specializing in poetry, 20th century American poetry and the intersection with advanced technology. His summation of John Updike, and he knows I'm a fan, well, Dad, he's just a rich, middle-class American white guy. How do we move along from that? Is perhaps John Updike is true middle in a time in society when people are so attracted to the edges of things? John Updike says of himself, he likes middles.
Yeah, we should answer first. Wait, do you want to answer first? Sure. Yeah, okay. And then you can hear it. But
Yeah, you can hear?
not yet, not yet.
Yeah, I think that is kind of the way we're thinking. David Foster Wallace was a rich white guy too, and Jonathan Franzen is a very rich white guy. And I'll tell you, I think that we need to take the kid gloves off. I mean, I know we're scholars, but I like to consider myself an aggressive scholar. And I'm aggressive about defending Updike and boisterous about it. Maybe it's because I'm a big guy. Most people are not going to take a swing at me. But I am aggressive. And you know, if you read my book that got published last year, you'll read some of that aggression. And I'm aggressive about the battle for the humanities too. And I think that goes hand in hand. Too many young people are not worrying about that either when they should be.
Okay, my name is Carla, I'm from Brazil, and I would like to share 2 brief experiences on that dialogues with all of you said. I understand your concern, and I think that teaching and spreading the news can also be a way, as our professor said, of keeping John Updike on our minds. And that I say because every year when I teach American literature, I open my course about, I try to make my students to think in a different way about the US, like washing from their minds the stereotypical views. I start by teaching them terrorists. And after reading terrorists, and then they go through a list of authors, 2 of them, it's still few students, but 2 of them came back and said, Professor, we'd like to do research on this author. It's very interesting. What else can we read? So it was not exactly about the terrorists, but other books. And they are doing, and they are at their 20s, so that's something. And the other thing is now about the US. So in Brazil, John Updike is still the most important American writer. It's still more than Don DeLillo and the others you mentioned. And the other thing is, about the US, I got a Fulbright scholarship this term, the fall term, to come to the US to research on Updike, terrorists. So you see, so I guess your Department of State still believe there is something in there, because many people applied for that opening, and you would see a Brazilian studying Updike in the US. So I'm in the University of Iowa doing that. And when I mentioned that to people say, oh yeah, John Updike, oh I read something by Updike. So a Brazilian, that's because of Brazil. I did study Brazil, of course, but that's because of Brazil, but only. And then we can start this conversation. And here at this conference today, throughout the sessions and plenary, as I watched them, I sent to my students on Facebook, like, see, that's Don Grenner, James Schiff, they read your book, Quentin Miller, they read your book over there in Brazil, you're very famous. I said, see, those guys are here, they are talking about Updike, and they are undergrads and graduation students, so they are following us over here. So I guess it's not the solution, I understand, humanity's been on a crisis, but there's something in there, I guess, that I hadn't thought of that before, but as you talked and you presented your papers, I started to think of that could be a way. Yeah, on this. Thank you.
Could I just respond really quickly to that? I think it's a great observation, and it sort of pulls against that idea of middles in a way, because all three of these conferences, in terms of their representation, have been very global, and it's really interesting to see, so I appreciate the comment.
And the other thing I was going to add to that, I mean, what you were saying about Brazil, I mean, that's news to me about Updike's reputation there, because I think, and I'd love to hear more about that, and I think, those of us, who are working in the States, I think don't always have a clear sense of how Updike is perceived throughout the world. So I think the more that people tell us and the more that they write about that is great news for us. And
I also think that the Centurion was great, and I contributed to that page. There was a Portuguese section, so my students could use, and when it finished, everybody was so sad. But we can talk.
Good. Richard?
I'm just saying, we have to consider the literary environment we all live in. We're living in an age of late postmodernism, decadent postmodernism. It's slipping into a postmodern age. The critical ideas by which Updike, it may not be preferred and certain other writers may be, are tired. But the zombie keeps walking, at least until we have a clear new direction. The note has already been sounded. Terry Eagleton, Stanley Fisher write books with titles like The Problem of Principle and After Theory, but the kind of new direction has not taken shape. Updike, I think we should trust his brilliance. To me, wrote one of the most effective defenses of what he did in the rabbit novel, since you feel the core of his reputation is there in that preface that he wrote to the Modern Library edition of the tetralogy. And it's really a ringing defense of his attack on moralistic approaches to characters and also easy political fiction. And I think we might look, we might, instead of trying to dress Updike up in the rags of postmodernism, which, as I say, is very, very late in that moment in cultural history, and look at what he actually said about what he was doing, and tune our criticism in that regard. I think we might do much better.
I just thought the point you made too about needing to trust the brilliance of Updike as a writer, I think is an important part, because I do think there are aspects of a writer's literary reputation where marketing and publishing and efforts to renovate a house and all sorts of things can be very helpful, but I mean ultimately it does have the writing, the brilliance of the writing has to sustain itself and has to endure, and I think that is one of the things that that I think all of us certainly find, but I think a great many people throughout the world find that in Updike. So I think what the writer that we're all behind, so to speak, has got a lot to say for him, more than almost anybody else I can think of.
There was a listening.
I'm not an Updike scholar. I'm a painting visual artist. And I think the sense I'm getting a lot of is that so many people, obviously, in the John Updike Society are indeed scholars, and you're all writing criticisms, and that's important to you. And I think there's other ways to get something that's valuable out there. It seems to me that what you're saying about will this group survive, I think that's happening with lots of other groups that have nothing to do with this kind of literary group. It's certainly true in artist circles, because younger people are involved in other things, as we all know, and younger people almost need to get something that's going to pull their attention. And so forget other people other than scholars enjoy John Updike's writing, for sure. And I think that when you, Batchelor, mentioned Mad Men, and I don't watch Mad Men all the time, but I have seen it, and it's very clever, very, very compelling. And I know young people who watch it. I think it's still alive, Mad Men. And it's interesting that everything has a life, not just people in groups, because one of Updike's favorite artists was Vermeer, and for many, many times in history, nobody even knew of Vermeer. He's now alive and kicking right now. But it just seems that somebody should plant a bug in the ear of the writers who do Mad Men. And I bet because that was the time where he was alive and well in many ways. And unfortunately, popular culture is something we all know and look at. I bet if Updike's works were mentioned in some of the things that were happening in some of the episodes, I think it's still going on in the 1960s taking place, I bet young people would start reading it because they don't know about it, because it seems many times that when someone like John Updike has a life, he's gone, there are people who still remember him, but then he too will fade out for a while, maybe forever, maybe for a period of time. But people who don't know about him, young people who don't know about him, need to find out about him in other ways than college courses. Does that make any sense?
It makes a lot of sense, and I think, these things, you were talking, I guess, about, or one of the two of you, I forget, sorry, what the next big thing that's going to help to revive, like in a mini-series or something on all of the rabbit books would be awfully cool. Part of what I was hoping to indicate with the internet is that it's just not there, that there's a kind of crisis of accessibility to Updike or representation of Updike on the open internet that is a problem. I mean, Updike was, it struck me in Jim's response to that last question, to Richard's question or comment, that Updike was such a book guy, right? That, he was into the aesthetics of his book, he was into generating all of these books. We're all into books. I think the younger generation doesn't have the same relationship to books, and it's not as though the internet has killed the book, but it's making a pretty good effort to do that, I think. So it's just something that worries me, that there has to be a kind of confluence between these wonderful books that Updike produced and created and whatever the next version of representing those books is. And I'm not the guy to do it, but I recognize it as, and whether it's film, television, or anything else on the internet that's smaller or bigger, YouTube, who the hell knows. Something has to be done in order to kind of raise his stock in those venues, so I fully agree.
We have two more questions. There's two hands were up. So first here.
One little trickle, not a solution to the whole thing, but one little trickle. My son teaches high school, junior or freshman high school AP. In the anthology is the A&P story, and so that's still there. But he always offers because half of them are from split families. And the conflicted, ambiguous roles in separating, oh, you can write about that, they're existentially drawn into the story without it being a didactic story. And the same thing happens with Poker Night. They all got family members who faced cancer. And that kind of existential gripping, apart from cultural, political, all that, they come up and say, can I borrow your collection of this and that? Because he's got all his books in his classroom. And they're borrowing other short stories and reading them. Not a big thing, but it's just a sustaining spotlight that I often don't hear when I hear all the kind of technical criticism stuff. Just that existential, gripping description.
I saw Don shaking his head in, kind of despair when you mentioned A&P, because at lunch today we were having this conversation about how maybe the era of A&P in the college classroom is over, and people are tired of teaching it.
That's why he throws in 2 more right away.
Right, and there are so many more beyond that. I think that's to your point. There's, A&P is not the beginning and end, and it may not even be in any way representative of the overall hubris. So it's an excellent point. There's a lot more to be discovered there.
Yeah, and as a segue to that, because, given the attention span and the immediate rewards expected from generation now, I think maybe poetry, like unsung poetry, is a real possibility. And short stories, as was just mentioned. And his connection to art, and his connection, even his music reviews show his interest in music. And his science with Roger's version. It seems like because Updike was so interested in so many things that it could touch a lot of different people.
And the panel was just from
Jim, I give Jim Schiff a lot of credit because he's one of the first people to say, look, this guy's one of the most brilliant nonfiction writers of the 20th century, and I think we could all do more in that regard to lift Updike's boat a little bit. As you mentioned, so many. You read something, he's writing about engineering or something. You think he's got a PhD in engineering. It's brilliant.
He didn't know about it. He found out about it.
Yep.
And the panel organizer reminded me, we actually go to 4:45, so there are plenty of time for more questions. I apologize. Yes, go ahead.
One of you mentioned earlier about the literary estate being hard to work with or maybe less than forthcoming. What is their role in this? And as a non-academic, I'm asking because I have no idea. What are they doing wrong and what could they be doing better?
Which one of you two would like to answer that?
I only hear rumors, so I'm not the person to talk with.
Somebody has to repeat the question. The question was essentially, what is the literary estate, how are they falling short in terms of meeting scholars' expectations? Is that a fair way of paraphrasing that?
I said, what maybe they're doing wrong, what could they be doing better?
Okay.
They could be more open.
Well, give me an example.
Well, like Jim mentioned, so is the letters actually, it's definitely going to happen.
No, I don't know what's going to happen with the letters. I mean, I think there's hope that there will be a selected letters, in the not too distant future. But I don't know if anything specific that's been decided about that. As a critic and as a reader of Updike, I think we'd all like to see them tomorrow. But I mean, I think there are things that a literary estate can do that actually are beneficial to a writer's career, and sometimes by allowing time to pass and so on, there could be strategic decisions. But I think again, speaking as a reader, we would love to have access to everything in print. But I do think Updike has a strong agent and an agent who has a lot of experience, and we'll have to see over time how things happen with the estate and how that affects the reputation.
Yeah, like what I mentioned, if you look at Mailer in the last year, his authorized biography came out, and a book of his selected essays, so his best essays, some were unpublished. And so you could do that kind of thing. In this day and age, it's all marketing. And if Updike doesn't remain a consistent blip on that kind of literary marketing scene, it hurts his overall, because there's always, like he says, there's always somebody pushing you up from the bottom, from younger.
Yeah. I'm always interested about the notion of literary reputations going up and going down. Everyone knows about Fitzgerald. Hemingway, as you mentioned, seems unassailable now, but he had a down period in the years following his death, his suicide leading into the Vietnam War. Pauline Kael, in a review of a movie, she said, there may be a time for a Hemingway revival, but now is not the time. And it seems a lot of times when reputations go up, it happens because of something like Melville gets rediscovered by the modernists, or the Portable Faulkner comes out, and all of a sudden everyone, and I don't even really have a question, except just, it seems like what you all are talking about is trying to achieve some sort of critical mass, and then whether it's a mini-series or a rediscovery, you're just trying to catch a break, you know, for something to come along. And that must seem frustrating.
I think it is, and there are only certain things we can control about it. I think you're absolutely right. There are always, ebbs and flows in an author's reputation. My other author of interest, main author of interest, is James Baldwin. And when I started working on Baldwin, he was in an ebb, and he is, there's a lot of attention being paid to Baldwin now. Who knows why? But I think Jim hit it on the head. I think that the key for us is just this kind of constantly keeping in the conversation the lesser known works. People think, oh, is he the guy who wrote Rabbit Run? And that's the end of the conversation. And we all know that there are 60 other books as well, and that there's an awful lot of rich material to mine there. As long as we keep discovering, rediscovering that, I think there's less danger that the ebb will, turn into a slide.
And you brought up two really good examples. I mean, Melville, Moby Dick basically being out of print and forgotten, and really the efforts of particularly one critic, but and then Faulkner being out of print and then winning the Nobel shortly thereafter. Zora Neale Hurston, Their Eyes Were Watching God, Chopin's The Awakening. I mean, all these books and careers that have been kind of brought back. So, but I do think the thing about Updike that's fairly real is that there is, like I said, I'm hard pressed to think of a year where there hasn't been an Updike book that's come out, a critical book, and that is not the case with 99.9% of significant writers in the 20th century. I mean, and even if you look at DeLillo and Roth, Roth, there's been an awful lot of work on his late writings, and I think that's kept him more. But Bellow again, I think was a real example